We're here at the University of South Florida in Tampa with Travis Bell and Janelle Applequist, faculty members who co-authored a new book called CTE, Media and the NFL, which details the underreporting by the National Football League of the risk its players have of developing the neurodegenerative disease, CTE.
Thank you for having us.
Really, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
So why don't you explain to the viewers what CTE is?
So CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It is a neurodegenerative brain disease similar to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, just to kind of give you a realm that it falls within.
Currently diagnosed primarily in professional football players, CTE is evident where there is an abundance of tangled tau proteins in different areas of the brain. Tau proteins are essential for neurological activity, but repetitive brain trauma can result in these proteins escaping their normal functions and cause serious complications in other areas. The affected areas will result in decreased neurological activity and therefore impair brain function.
And your book primarily focuses on the NFL and them really trying to hide what's happening with the football players.
We kind of drew a parallel between big tobacco and HIV and AIDS. Both of those cases, there was a lot of science coming out to the public, almost too much science, you could say, where it was really hard to kind of discern what information out of all of this should we be taking away. So we do look at what's at stake when there's a lot of information coming out and people need to know, certain bits and pieces, while the NFL is also putting out its own press releases in the beginning fighting CTE, and then finally coming out and admitting this is actually an issue so many years later.
Well, aren't they a multi-billion-dollar industry, so it only stands to reason they're wanting to protect that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's really a shame they're protecting the money end of it versus the players.
The NFL even went to great lengths to keep the real statistics hidden and make CTE appear to be a non-issue.
By creating their own mild traumatic brain injury committee, the MTBI committee that was formed in 1994, and they've started publishing research in 2003 that, in essence, part of a 14-part series that they published points out that football players are not at any greater risk of concussions or brain injuries than any other sport.
Unfortunately, CTE symptoms are still not very well understood. They are believed to be mentally and emotionally related, much like depression and high anxiety. Currently, the most challenging struggle with researching CTE is that it is not diagnosed until after death, when donated brains are studied and found to have had the trauma which causes it.
So it's really hard to then try to think back, what were some of those symptoms that maybe we saw in our family member, and it's only through brains that are donated. So it has an interesting sample with which it's trying to study this disease.
Lisa McHale was married to former NFL player and CTE sufferer Tom McHale. Since his death, she has been raising awareness of CTE.
A great husband. He was my best friend. And things were just really great until they weren't. He became a very, very different person when he admitted to me that he had been suffering from depression for quite some time. He died on May 25th, 2008, but we had been losing him for years. That's when it became final and permanent.
In 2017, a study was performed in which 110 out of 111 donated NFL brains were found to have CTE. Over the past several years, there has been a rise in researching how to better protect players from long-term injury. Several organizations are spreading awareness to the effects of CTE and believe education will be a key combatant.
So children are absolutely susceptible to CTE, even more so than adults, because there's more growth potential in the head, so there's more room, that means, for the brain to get kind of banged around, which you don't want. The NFL has a really vested interest in making sure that football at the youth level stays, because that obviously affects their future with their recruits.
What are you seeing, say, with high schoolers that were playing football? Are you seeing a drop in participation?
This year was the first time in approximately 25 years that there was a drop in the U.S. in youth football participation, and especially at the high school level. I think that's where you're seeing the largest number of drop-off is at the high school level.
Right.
Because now you're seeing cases of CTE diagnosed in people who only played high school football.
Although football seems to have garnered all the recent headlines, CTE is common in any sport where players are subject to repetitive brain trauma.
This is a repetitive brain trauma issue, It just so happens to be that football has garnered the majority of the headlines.
So that would include cheerleaders, boys or girls that are involved in gymnastics.
Absolutely. It absolutely includes those sports. But even beyond sports, one thing that Travis and Christian and I found in this book is victims of domestic violence, soldiers who have been involved in combat, anything where you're really banging your body around a lot and the head isn't being supported.
You don't necessarily have to have been diagnosed with a concussion, as CTE is more about the repetitive trauma rather than one event in particular.
The term concussion has been linked with CTE a lot, and we understand why that is because that's more easy to explain.
Tom never sustained any massive concussions that he was aware of. As it turns out, however, Tom's brain did show signs of CTE. After realizing the effects it had on her husband and family, Lisa has taken up the cause to raise awareness of this issue.
I said, I think that Tom would want to be a part of that if it's to help future generations. But you have to know he never had any concussions in my mind. We had never talked about it. So I fully expected that he would be essentially a control subject. And if that would be helpful, by all means, yes. So it has absolutely been, in hindsight, and certainly since then, that everything changed for me, my understanding, the insight.
Now, if somebody is younger, say in high school, and you're able to stop them, are you ever able to reverse the effects of CTE?
I don't know that you can reverse the effects. I think you can try to slow down its progression by not re-injuring the brain. But I think it's like any sort of brain trauma. Once it's there, it's hard to really recover from it. You can just try to alleviate it, live with it, deal with it.
It'll be very difficult to make any changes to an inherently violent sport that has had such an impact on our American culture. It'll come down to a question of parenting. If parents are willing to let their children play these sports, they need to be more educated and pay close attention to preventing possible traumatic hits.
A lot of the issue with repetitive brain trauma is that people get back into play too soon because there is that culture of masculinity that then parents are like,
right,
you're risking the potential long-term success by sitting out an extra week. But in reality, you're taking the time and the due diligence to actually protect your brain.
Sometimes when you're talking to people about the NFL and they go, well, they are paying multi-million dollars to the players and they're informed. And you go, but still, all the money in the world, let's face it, we all only have one brain.
Absolutely. And I think that one problem as well with that is that the NFL has been very strategic in its advertising campaigns and its public relations efforts since all of this has come out and since they actually have admitted that CTE is a significant issue that they're dealing with. One thing that they've done to kind of control their narrative is saying, we are informing the players. We're helping them make informed decisions. We're helping them choose better helmets, things like that. But it's almost this false sense of autonomy that they're giving to the players because
we'll just up your pay to make it worth your while.
Exactly. And unfortunately, some football players are coming from an upbringing where that might seem very appealing to them, and money is appealing to anybody if we're being honest. I don't know that the NFL is doing its due diligence and actually being honest and forthright with the research that they're sharing.
They claim to have made rule changes to improve the safety of the game by implementing a concussion protocol that denotes how long a player should be taken out of a game after a concussion until they are deemed okay.
So now they have this concussion protocol that you have to be in. If you suffer a concussion in practice or a game, you have to be out for a certain amount of time until you're deemed okay. Another area that we're studying right now is what's called the Future of Football advertising campaign that the NFL's put out. And it's trying to make this sort of collective community approach to safety. So I'm still very skeptical of what the NFL is doing in terms of their messaging and what they might be doing in the back channels. Right. We just don't have access to them. But I think knowing the trajectory of everything that they've done in terms of cover-ups and payouts, I think that's where my skepticism remains from.
Even sources outside the NFL share false claims and disinformation about CTE. A good example is Rob Gronkowski tweeting that he cured his own CTE, which is an impossible claim and a dangerous one to spread in an uneducated public.
But so many people retweeted or loved the tweet that Gronkowski had sent out initially, and it's very, very scary to think of the power that some of these players have in educating the public.
Travis and Janelle are highly interested in the role media plays in connecting CTE and the NFL and what role media can play in better educating the public on risks, symptoms, and opening a discussion to foster education.
What role did media play in making it a football epidemic? But then thinking long-term, what role can media do in better educating the American public on what are the risks, symptoms, who's who could potentially get this to really foster a larger conversation.
More information on CTE can be found from the CTE Center at Boston University and Concussion Legacy Foundation.
CTE is still in its relative infancy in media, even though it tracks back to 1928 in boxing. Its narrative now is football. So there's so much more knowledge and public conversation going on around it that I think that's really what it's about, is fostering that information.
With greater media exposure like Travis and Janelle's research and more education, people are now better equipped to understand the effects of certain activities, like contact sports, on our health and our children's health, and can now take more stringent precautions to protect ourselves and the ones we love.
Make sure you stay tuned. Coming up after the break, a story of recovery.